afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and this episode of ISTJ Info Dumping is brought to you by this t-shirt, because I just can't get enough of this all these years later. At least it's not Raid Shadow Legends that's sponsoring this, thank goodness. And hey, even if I was theoretically doing a sponsorship, these t-shirts are all sold out, so you missed your chance. You could have gone on a mission trip back in the day, but oh well, you can't be everywhere, right? That's God's job. In all seriousness, the main reason why I'm doing this video is because I've just been thinking that there's been a lot of friction lately between the dominant judging types and the dominant perceiving types. Now, for those of you that are new to my videos, you might be thinking, oh, judging types, that just means the IJs and the EJs. Sadly, that's only half of the equation. Yes, the EJs are judgers, but the other judging types are the IP types. And the way that you're able to tell the difference between a judger and a perceiver is you look at what their top function is. If it's thinking or feeling, that's a judging function. And if it's sensing or perceiving, or sensing or intuition, that's a perceiving function. So for example, the IPs always have either introverted thinking or introverted feeling, therefore making them still a judging type, but I guess you could say an introverted judging type. So believe it or not, a lot of people don't use the terms extroverted and introverted judging very much. Now, for the sake of clarity, I'll just say that my type in this scenario is a perceiving type. Even though I'm an ISTJ, the J and the P are technically flipped for the introvert types in Myers-Briggs because, again, leading with sensing is kind of weird. That thinking would be the second function, and yet that's what determines our last letter. But the reason why Myers-Briggs does that is because the introverts, after spending so much time in their head, externalize a certain way, and so the J and the P is representing how do they present themselves to the world after they've finished thinking. So I guess you could say socionics has it slightly more accurate because I would be considered an ISTP if I were in socionics terminology. So what do you mean by friction between the judging and perceiving types? Well, I can't really speak for everyone because everyone is slightly different, but a couple of patterns I've noticed recently is that judging types in general tend to be very enforcey and rigid about whatever system it is that they believe in. If they're the extroverted judging types, they seem to be very pushy about some kind of external system. Like, for example, the ENFJs might push so hard for harmony that they might overcompensate by, I don't know, giving you 3 dozen helpings of eggs like Mrs. Weasley does, or saying, like, make sure you're super comfortable. Is there anything I can get you? And if the person says no, they'll get you something anyway. Because they believe so hard in that need for harmony that they can't imagine someone who doesn't need that system. In the same way, the IP types will get really offended if you challenge their particular way of thinking or their point of view. So if you tell an ISTP, for example, or I think it would be a better example if I use the INTP. If you told them, I really hate philosophy, that's not really my thing, they'll get super offended and act like a dominant feeling type. They'll be, you dare to not comprehend philosophy? You must be an individual totally below my intelligence level if you can't comprehend this brilliance. So rather than asking questions and saying, I'm detecting that there's a failure to communicate. Maybe I should talk it over, see what's going on. No, instead, they'll get defensive and go on the attack mode, as opposed to getting that thinking face like those of us who are perceiving types would. Now, the perceiving types, the problem here is that we like to consider all of our options and take in new experiences. We don't like to think life is complete without the information. It's like trying to make a puzzle without all the pieces. It just doesn't work. Or trying to start up a car with no gas. You're missing a crucial component of what makes the car able to work in the first place. Whereas it seems like the judging types are like, the car won't move without gas, we'll just get a bunch of people to push it. At least that's the impression that I get from them. So, seeing as a good majority of you that watch my videos are in fact perceiving types, either literal perceiving types or introverted perceivers, aka an IJ type, you may have run into these really obnoxious EJ and IP types that try to tell you, oh, I think I know you better than you know yourself. And you might be like, how do I get these guys to shut up? Well, getting them to shut up is probably not the best solution, but I can give you tips that I have used over the years to help be able to survive against these types and not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. I wish I could just have a revolution against EJs and make the entire society perceiving types. Maybe I can give you little breathing exercises. No, that's too much of a yoga teacher thing. I'm just going to tell you some tips that I've used over the years to try to get along with those types as much as possible. So the first thing is, don't really take anything personally. Like, if these people are telling you off, chances are they're also telling themselves off. As much as ESTJs like to be bossy and tell people what to do, they're also telling themselves what to do on a daily basis. And if things don't go according to plan, even among their own personal lives when they're alone, they're going to throw an absolute fit. So it's more so the fact that their system is being disrupted as opposed to you being an idiot. Of course, being judging types, meaning that whatever their dominant function, thinking, or feeling is, that's also going to be their inferior, the inverse. Introverted feeling or extroverted thinking. The introvert is first, extrovert's at the bottom, vice versa. And it's always going to be thinking or feeling or thinking. So I think a good wording you could use, at least in your own head, if you're not as brave as I am, where I kind of just say it like it is, you can just say in your head, there, system, you did a bad job. I'll just let you take the blame while I get off scot-free. So generally speaking, it's not really about you. It's more about how their subjective way of seeing the world has been disrupted. Another thing that really helps is to continue being calmer. And then, this might be a little bit mean to some of you, but I find that the calmer I am and ask more questions, the more defensive the judging type gets. Like if I say, oh, okay, I guess, let me give you an example of that. So one time I was washing the dishes at my old job, and we were having a hard time with having enough people to get the job done. Normally it's a 4-man job, we had 2. So one of the chefs comes in, he's like, what's the holdup? Hurry up, you guys, get the job done. And I'd say, okay, well, let me just grow an extra pair of arms then. And he's like, don't you get a smart mouth with me, young man. So you see how he's even more agitated because I dared to point out the fact that there wasn't enough people to get the job done. Now, you could have also said, well, Paul, that was a bit disrespectful, but at the same time, if he had eyeballs, he could have easily seen that there were not enough people. So in that respect, he's so concerned about my system is to get the job done that he's not analyzing and saying, maybe the job isn't getting done because there's not enough people. What should I do to make it so that it could be better? But the flip side to this mentality is, even if you don't like them getting angrier, it also has a tendency to make them lose patience so that they eventually just give up. If you keep telling an INTP, for example, I'm sorry, but your philosophy is just too much, or if you pretend to admit defeat and said, yeah, I'm a really stupid individual, I have an IQ of 0, and you are the king of the universe, your majesty, and I cannot possibly comprehend your genius, they'll just say, you're just not worth my time, I'm out of here. So if you keep allowing them to have their moments of victory, eventually they're going to be satisfied with their victory and just take off. Now, this doesn't work for everyone, but generally speaking, I find that it, at the very least, gets them to realize that they cannot push you around like a toy. If you stand your ground and say, I know you want to control everything, and I know you want to be a super choleric and think that everything is under your thumb, but I am going to be the exception. I am not going to allow you to push me around. Because we all have free will. We're all capable of making our own decisions. So making sure that you enforce that free will is a big part of what can help you survive against the dominant judgers. Another thing that might really help is if you're the super scatterbrained type that is just kind of asking for it, maybe just don't ask for it. Like, even perceiving types can get annoyed when you're being deliberately aggravating. Like, if I tell my teenagers when I'm chaperoning a conference, okay, I need you to be at the banner at 2:45 so that we can go into the general session as a group, as is part of the rules, and then they don't, I might say, why didn't you do it? They're like, I forgot. So in that respect, that's just negligence. That really can't be something that I should, or that can't be something that's excused. I would say, what the heck? Aren't you taking this seriously? You made a commitment. So in that respect, obviously perceiving types can get frustrated too when people are literally being incompetent. The difference is that perceiving types in general analyze the situation first and then come to that conclusion. I've often compared it a couple of times to, I've usually said like the difference between an INFP and an ENFP, because both of them tend to be a bit like emotionally active, is that if, for example, say you bump into an INFP really hard, the INFP is probably going to get super affronted and say, ow, watch where you're going, you hurt me. Whereas the ENFP is going to say, oh, I'm sorry, did you accidentally trip or something? Here, let me see if I can help you. So the ENFP is realizing, there's context missing. Obviously, it hurt, but the person didn't intend for the hurt. Therefore, I don't see the need to get angry. Whereas the INFP is going to feel the pain, and they're immediately going to lash out with the, ow, I am hurt. But then when the person says, oh, sorry, I just tripped, and they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have snapped at you like that. They come to that realization that they made a wrong assumption after the fact. And that's more or less what makes judgers judgers. Another example is when we were having more difficulty at work, and one of my bosses came in, he's just like, you guys are going too slow, pick up the pace. And I was like, how can we pick up the pace when one of our main guys is missing and the machine is on the fritz? He was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess you wouldn't be able to pick up the pace without the machine. Oh. And then he like goes away with his head held down, drooping out, because again, he jumped to the conclusion of, you guys are doing a bad job, without taking into account maybe, is there a reason why we're doing a bad job? So, in other words, I think what we as perceiving types have to realize is that it doesn't come naturally for the judging types to observe. Obviously, in the case of like the introverted perceiving types, they do a lot of thinking. But that thinking, as opposed to taking in new information, is more about reinforcing their own views. So let's take, for example, an ISFP that believes really strongly that the Catholic faith is the only faith. The ISFP is going to constantly question that view and think, why do I believe in the Catholic faith to begin with? And then if they've come to the conclusion that the Catholic faith is their faith, they're going to reinforce it, saying, okay, how do I continue making this belief possible? And more importantly, they might even think, how do I defend this belief if someone crosses it? Because a lot of times the IP types, they have this kind of melancholy temperament where they'll say, you do you, I'll do me, we're totally fine. But if you try to tell them you are blatantly wrong and you are incorrect in your beliefs, oh, they'll get defensive. Then all of a sudden that we can agree to disagree goes out the window, and all of a sudden you're on the warpath. So if you're around those types and you're fed up with them jumping the gun instead of asking, maybe we can have a Socratic dialogue and talk this out, I think the best thing to do would be to, I guess, not be an attacker to begin with. Like, if you are really the type that's going after a particular belief, you're not going to get anywhere by talking against a person with the belief. You have to go to the belief itself. So for example, let's say that you're not Catholic and you really are determined to think that the Catholic Church is evil, and you think, oh, well, let me just go to this Catholic and let me defeat them in an argument, and then that means that I have proven that the Catholic faith is not the real religion. I've come to a victory! I have proven it! No, you haven't. You've just proven that that person doesn't know how to defend their faith. There are plenty of other Catholics that can just pick up the slack and say, well, that person couldn't defend their faith. We can. You'd want to go directly to the source and take it down where it crumbled. So, I don't know, you'd want to book a trip to Rome and talk to the Pope. I'm not saying I'd recommend that because I'm Catholic myself. I certainly wouldn't want you to do that. But that general logic is what you'd have to do to get people to stop believing in it. Of course, if they're a dominant judger, they'll probably say that they believe it anyway, even if you were to hypothetically say that philosophy is not really possible within the grounds of logic. But I just think that it's the wrong approach to contradict an idea by just getting into an argument with one person. So, general rule of thumb, don't attack someone's belief system. Rather, question it. Or, if you don't want to question it, just be Socratic about it. Ask the person, okay, you seem to think that it's totally okay to, I don't know, just thinking off the top of my head, wear spaghetti straps. I might be one of those keep my shoulders covered types. Oh, I take it you have really strong sunscreen? You know, questions like that, where that's a really innocent way of wording it, and that way the person doesn't feel like you're attacking them. Rather, you've sort of turned the question into an affirmation. Like what I like to do is I like to compliment the person, or I guess hypothetically compliment the person, and then that leads into them naturally creating a discussion. Like, for example, I generally prefer it when my female friends have their hair down, like I do right now, as opposed to tying it back in a ponytail. So oftentimes I'll say like, oh, wow, it looks like you've decided to go bald. And then the person will just pull down their hair and say, no, I've just got it tied back. You want me to put it down? And obviously they're my friends. They know that I'm joking. They've analyzed my tone of voice, said people are perceiving types in general, so they are going to take into account the context. And then that in turn creates a harmonious situation, because then both of us have our hair down, both of us are happy. So in other words, I guess you could say, since perceiving types love context so much, then one way to survive dominant judgers is to tell yourself what the context is, and then sort of give yourself a little bit of a pat on the back. Or even better, talk to another perceiving type who might be nearby and reaffirm the context. So if, for example, you and your coworker are working together and your boss yells at you for something that's clearly out of your control, talk to your coworker. Maybe you're an INFJ and you've got an ISFJ coworker. You might want to ask her, do you really think that was justified? No, the evidence doesn't line up. I think you were perfectly fine in that particular instance. Ah, well, I'm glad you think so. That's so sweet. You see how even though the judging type is causing friction, because you believe in objective truth, therefore you're able to know that you were in the right? As long as you're aware that judging types, as much as they like to think that they know everything and everything has to be perfectly correct what they say, they're not. They're capable of making mistakes just like all of us. They tend to take it more personally when they make mistakes because they're so keen on enforcing their ideas, as opposed to thinking, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't have enough evidence. And maybe we need to treat them with more charity. Maybe we need to say, okay, well, how about you show me your evidence? And maybe that way, instead of just saying that you know everything, show me that you know everything. Then maybe we can both come to an agreement. Maybe you are absolutely right, and maybe I do need to consider what you have to say more often. So what do you guys think? Do you think I'm giving judging types too hard of a time? Are you a dominant judging type and thinking I'm giving you too much of a hard time? Or do you think I'm totally off base and not being accurate to Myers-Briggs and I should delete my channel, blah, 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 blah? That itself is a judging tendency, so you might just be proving my point there. Either way, Let me know in the comment section. Let me know if you're a judging type that takes your time to think. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and I really hope there's a day where we can all just get along. Bye!